This case has never been louder. 3 people arrested, a 6-figure legal fund, lawyers on every side, one of them a name you'd recognize. Somebody even went after Nolan's mother's job, and a fake autopsy report got so out of hand the state itself had to step in and call it a lie. All that noise in 1 week, and underneath every bit of it sits one quiet thing nobody's been able to explain. A hole in the timeline about 90 minutes wide. Everything you're about to hear, every arrest, every lawsuit, every threat, it all circles back to that one gap. Stay with me, because that gap is still the whole case. If you are staying with us, take a second right now and hit subscribe so you don't miss where this goes next. And while you are here, tell us on the comment where in the world you are watching from. It matters to us to know how far this story have reached. And we read every single one. Quick word before we get into it, and it matters more this time than it ever has. This case is active. No cause of death has been confirmed. Nobody has been charged in connection with Nolan's death. And this week especially, a whole lot of what's floating around out there is straight up fake. So I'm going to do what I always do. Only what's confirmed, only what's on the record. When something's a rumor, I'll call it a rumor. When something's been proven false, I'll tell you that too. Because tonight, telling the difference is the entire job. If you're new here, 4 sentences. 18-year-old Nolan Wells went to Horn Island for the 4th of July with a group of friends. When they left, Nolan stayed behind, and 2 days later he was found in the water. The public got told no foul play before a single autopsy was done. His family never accepted that. 2 autopsies came back without a cause of death, and the country's been locked in ever since. Now, this week. And this week, the noise almost buried the one thing that actually matters. Let me start with the quiet thing, the gap, because everything else tonight makes more sense once you understand it. You remember the United Cajun Navy, the volunteer search group that helped look for Nolan's body and has stayed on this case ever since. Well, this week they did something the official investigators hadn't done out in the open. They built a timeline, 22 pages, and they didn't pull it out of thin air. They asked everybody who was on that island that day to send them what they had. Photos, videos, GPS coordinates, witness accounts. Then they took all of it and stacked it up, minute by minute, to reconstruct that 4th of July. And here's the part I need you to really hear, because it's easy to blow this out of proportion, and I'm not going to do that. Their report does not accuse anybody of anything. It doesn't claim foul play. It doesn't name a suspect. What it found was a hole, a gap in the timeline, a stretch of time where no photo, no video, no confirmed GPS ping, no witness account anybody can verify, nothing, can tell you where Nolan was or what was happening around him. And they used a specific word for it. They called it a material gap. Now that word matters. In this kind of work, material doesn't mean kind of interesting. It means significant. It means this isn't some little missing detail that wouldn't change anything. It means this is the gap that actually matters. Sitting at the exact spot where the whole question of this case lives. Because think about where that hole falls. Between the last time anybody can independently prove they saw Nolan alive and the moment his friend's boat left that island. That right there. That's the window. Did Nolan choose to stay, or did something happen? Everything, and I mean everything, hangs on what took place inside that gap. And as of tonight, nobody can fill it with anything solid. And I want to give this group their credit, because it's rare in this case. They didn't run and speculate. They didn't say, here's what we think happened in that gap. They said, here's the hole. Here's exactly why it matters. And here's what it would take to close it. And they laid that out too. Authenticated metadata, meaning the real, verified timestamps buried inside those photos and videos, not just when somebody posted them online, but when they were actually taken. More GPS records, and more witnesses, people who were out there in that exact window and either haven't come forward yet or haven't been asked the right questions. We've already seen in this case why that kind of hard verification matters. Remember that pool party photo that went around, the one people swore showed Nolan alive after he went missing. That got put to bed the moment somebody checked the actual metadata and found the picture was taken more than a week earlier. Not an argument, not a theory. Just the file's own data, telling the truth. That's the model. And that's what this report is asking for. Spread across the whole day. Real proof, not noise, which brings me to the noise. Because while that careful, sourced report was doing its quiet work, something a whole lot louder was spreading, and it tells you exactly how out of control this case has gotten. A document started going around online, a toxicology report, supposedly Nolan's, laying out, in official-looking detail, what was in his system the day he died, and people ran with it, shared it, quoted it, treated it like the answer everybody had been waiting on had finally leaked. There was just one problem. It was fake, fabricated, not real, and it spread so far, so fast, that this wasn't left to rumor to sort out. The state of Mississippi's own top public safety official, the Commissioner of Public Safety, Sean Tyndall, had to come out publicly and shut it down. He said it plain. The report going around was fraudulent. And then he said something that stuck with me, because you don't usually hear a government official talk like this. He said Nolan's family, his friends, and most importantly, Nolan himself deserve better than this, and he named exactly what's driving it. His words, fraudsters, AI, and social media are a recipe for disaster. All they want, he said, is for you to click and share. Don't. Let me tell you something, that right there is the whole problem with this case in one sentence. Because here's the trap we're all sitting in. The real answers are sealed. The state's actual autopsy is done but locked away. Toxicology hasn't been released, not the state's, not the family's independent one. So there's this big empty space where the truth is supposed to be. And when the truth won't fill that space, fakes rush in to fill it instead. A fabricated document, dressed up to look official, built by AI, spread by people who either couldn't tell or didn't care. Oh, so now folks are out here grieving a real boy off a fake report? Make it make sense. That's why I keep telling you, SIGT, confirmed only. Because in a case like this, believing the wrong thing isn't harmless. It's how an innocent person gets a target on their back, and how a family gets hurt all over again. So hold on to that gap. Hold on to what's actually been proven, because now we've got to walk through the loudest part of all, the lawyers, the money, the arrests, and the war that broke out around this boy's death. That's part 2. Don't go anywhere. All right. Now the loud part, because while that quiet gap sat there unanswered, the world around this case turned into an all-out legal war. And it's coming from every direction at once. Let me start with the friends. Because their families made a move this week that got a lot of people talking. They set up a legal defense fund, and by the time anybody was really paying attention, it had pulled in over $158,000. This was raised for Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, Morgan Seymour, and some of the others who've been named and accused online. And the statement they put out with that fund, it did not hold back. They said these young men haven't even been allowed to grieve their friend, that instead of mourning, they got buried under an online campaign of accusations, harassment, threats, and defamation. They said some of them couldn't even attend Nolan's funeral. And they named names. They pointed straight at Al Sharpton, at Ben Crump, at what they called race baiters and provocateurs, and accused them of inventing false narratives and stirring division for profit. And they laid out exactly what that money is for. Two things. One, to defend these friends against wrongful death lawsuits they believe Nolan's family is about to file. And two, to fund a legal team to sue the people spreading what they call slander and lies. So sit with that. This isn't just defense anymore. They're saying they're coming back. They're going to sue too. And then they brought in the muscle. The friends hired an attorney named J. Tyler Cox. But it's the second name that made everybody stop. A defamation lawyer named Edward Paltzik, a man who has represented Donald Trump himself in high-profile legal battles against major media companies, CBS, the New York Times, the BBC. Now here's where I've got to be careful, and you know I will be, because there are two ways people are reading this, and I'm going to give you both, and I'm not going to tell you which one is right. Reading one, this is exactly what innocent people do. You've got a mob online calling you a killer. You've got death threats. You've got your face all over the internet attached to something you say you didn't do. So you lawyer up hard with the biggest name you can find, and a lot of legal experts have said plainly, if you're a witness in a case this hot, getting a lawyer isn't a sign of guilt. It's common sense. Lawyering up doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Reading two, and this is what a lot of folks online are saying, so I'm telling you it's their opinion and not a proven fact. Some people look at all that money, all that legal firepower, a Trump lawyer who fights the press, and they ask a simple question. If Nolan just drowned, what do you need all that for? I'm not answering that. I said I wouldn't. Both of those readings fit the exact same facts. Where you land depends on where you're already standing. That's this whole case in a nutshell. Now, let me show you the flip side of all this. Because the online mob everybody keeps talking about, it's not a made-up thing. It has real victims. And one of them is a young man named Bart Edmiston Jr. Here's who he actually is, according to the record. He was Nolan's old high school football teammate, home for the summer from college. On the 4th, he took his own boat out to Horn Island, just like hundreds of other people did that day. He wasn't in Nolan's group. He wasn't on Nolan's boat. At some point, a completely different boat had engine trouble, and Bart went over and helped tow it a short distance. That's it. That's the entire documented extent of what he did that day. A stranger needed help. He helped. He went home. But then, that altered audio hit the internet, and the mob went looking for names. And they built a whole theory around Bart off of one old high school photo of him standing next to a young woman. A photo people decided proved some jealousy motive. His lawyer, Russell Latino, came out and took it apart piece by piece. The woman in that photo wasn't even who they claimed. Bart didn't know her. There was no motive, no involvement, nothing. And Bart hadn't been hiding. He'd cooperated with investigators from the jump, sat for interviews, handed over his phone, let them look at his boat and his GPS, gave them photos, videos, and a list of more than 20 people who could account for where he was. That's not a man running. That's the opposite. And for his trouble, he got a credible threat against his safety. Somebody posted his family's home address online, along with their jobs. So now the FBI, the Mississippi Attorney General, and the U.S. Attorney's Office are involved. Not in Nolan's death, but in the threats against Bart, and his lawyers firing off cease and desist letters to influencers who spread the lies. Let me tell you something. That's the cost of guessing. A young man who by every account just helped tow a boat ended up with strangers mapping out where his family sleeps. Whatever you believe about this case, that part is not justice. That's just harm. And speaking of harm, this week brought a third arrest. Threats again. Not the death. Threats. His name is Edward Porter, 40 years old, out of Illinois, more than 500 miles from Mississippi. Same pattern as the two before him. Somebody watching this case from far away who turned their anger into a federal crime. And what he's accused of is ugly. Federal complaint says he went after 2 witnesses, told one of them he'd come kill them and their family, and then texted that witness their own home address, just to prove he had it, and told a second witness he'd kill them, cut up their body and stuff it in a suitcase. I'm not going to sit in that, but I'll say what I've said every time. Whatever anybody feels about this case, the grief, the anger, the suspicion, there is no version of justice for Nolan that runs through threatening a witness and their family. None. So that's 3 now. 3 people, 3 different states. A man who threatened a judge connected to one of the friends. A woman who called bomb threats into the sheriff's office working the case. And now this. 3 federal arrests in about a month. And I need you to hold on to the same thing I keep coming back to, because headlines keep blurring it. Not one of these 3 arrests is for Nolan's death. Every single one is for threats. The death investigation itself, still no charges. Still no suspect named. So you can have 3 people in handcuffs and still not have a single answer about how this boy died. Make it make sense. That's exactly where we are. And then there's the move that to me was the coldest of the whole week. Somebody went after Nolan's mother's job. An anonymous complaint got filed against Christine with the Mississippi Board of Nursing. A misconduct investigation against a woman who, by her attorney's account, has been a nurse for years without a single complaint in her whole career, until the exact moment she started publicly demanding answers about her dead son. Crump called it what a lot of people were already thinking, a warning shot, an attempt to scare a grieving mother into shutting up. He said attacking her career doesn't answer what happened to Nolan. It just tells you the question matters, and the answer is scaring somebody. Now, here's the update on that, and it matters. The board closed the case. It's over. And Christine, through all of it, kept her job. She'd actually taken leave to grieve, and she said her employer had been supportive the whole time. But hear what she said when it closed. She thanked everybody praying for her family, and she said this had added more hurt to an already devastating time, because she loves her job and she loves her patients. Think about that. A woman burying her son, and on top of everything, she's got to stop and defend her professional record from somebody too much of a coward to even put their name on the complaint. That's the kind of thing this family's been living with. But hey, that wasn't the only narrative Christine had to push back on this week, because there's the whole story about what her son was doing that day, the timeline that doesn't quite add up, and a receipt Christine pulled out that a lot of people missed. That's part 3. Don't skip it. Now back to that gap, because this week, a piece of it got picked apart in a way that has half the internet convinced, and the other half saying not so fast. It comes from Warren's own interview, the one he did on camera. At one point, he says the last time he laid eyes on Nolan was 3 o'clock. 3. He's specific about it. But then, a little later in that same interview, he's describing the group leaving around 4:30, and he says Nolan was sitting by the boat with the girl he was with. So people caught that and ran. Because how do you tell me the last time you saw him was 3, and then tell me what he was doing at 4:30? Which one is it? For a lot of folks, that one slip was all they needed. But here's the other side, and it's a fair one. A search and rescue expert who's worked missing persons cases looked at this exact thing, and what he said was, this is normal. Eyewitnesses in a situation like this weren't checking a clock. They didn't know at the time that any of it would matter. Nobody knew Nolan was missing until hours later. So people's memories of times and moments getting jumbled, that's expected. In fact, he said, if every single witness told the exact same story with the exact same timestamps, that would be the real red flag. That's what coordination looks like. So which is it? A slip that means nothing, or a slip that means everything? I'm not going to tell you. You heard both. That's the whole point of this case. The same fact reads two completely different ways depending on where you're standing. Then there's the drinking, because a narrative took hold early that Nolan was heavily intoxicated that day. And that's the tidy explanation for how a young man ends up in the water. Christine went on national TV and pushed back on that. Hard. And she did it with a receipt. She said a document listing her son as heavily drinking got treated like fact. And she asked the question straight. Her words, but was he though? Or is this a narrative that you guys want to use? And she didn't just deny it. She said one of Nolan's football coaches told her he sat and talked with Nolan that afternoon, somewhere between about 2:45 and 3:30. Talked about college, talked about his plans. And the coach told her, in his words, Nolan was perfectly fine. Now, to be fair, and we're always fair here, Nolan's own friends have said there was drinking happening across that group that day. It was the 4th of July. That part isn't really in dispute. What Christine is pushing back on is the specific, uglier version. Nolan singled out as sloppy, falling down drunk, in a way that quietly suggests he did this to himself. And there's actually support for her side. Even the search group's own spokesman said his understanding was that Nolan's blood alcohol level was not at an intoxicated level. But here's the thing that ends that whole argument. The real toxicology, the state's and the family's independent one, has not been released. Neither one. So anybody out here telling you for a fact how drunk Nolan was or wasn't, they don't have it. Nobody does yet. That's why that fake report spread so easy. It walked into an empty room, and that empty room is the same reason this case can't close. The one document that could actually start answering things is sealed. The state's official autopsy is done, completed, but it hasn't been released, not to the public, and get this, not even to Nolan's own family. It's going to a grand jury first. A family that has fought this hard, this long for the truth, still has not been allowed to read what the state found inside their own child. What we do have is the family's independent autopsy, and it found no fractures, no deep tissue injuries, but it also could not determine a cause of death, and it could not rule out foul play. And there was one detail in it that the pathologist flagged himself. A red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head, behind his ears. He described it as quite large. He could not explain what caused it, and he said it merits further investigation, while being honest that Nolan's body was so decomposed by the time he examined it that some things could have been missed, not proof of anything. Just one more question sitting in the same pile as all the others. Unexplained. Unresolved, waiting. So here's where all of it lands tonight. The loudest week this case has ever had. 3 arrests, none for the death. A 6-figure war chest and a lineup of lawyers. A mother who had to fight for her job while burying her son. A fake report the state itself had to knock down. And a bystander who helped tow a boat, now living with strangers who know where he sleeps. All that noise. And underneath every bit of it, that same quiet gap. 90 minutes nobody can account for. A sealed report nobody's allowed to read. And a cause of death that after everything is still one word. Undetermined. Because here's what this whole case keeps teaching us. When the truth stays locked away long enough, the space where it should be doesn't stay empty. It fills up with theories, with fakes, with money, with rage. And the longer the real answer takes, the louder all of that gets. But none of it is the truth. It's just what rushes in while we wait for it. And a mother is still waiting, still asking the only thing she's ever asked, what happened to her son? This case is not finished, and neither are we. The moment that grand jury moves, the moment that sealed autopsy sees daylight, the moment real toxicology is actually confirmed, or that 90-minute gap finally gets filled with something solid, we'll be right back here, breaking it down the same way we always do. Confirmed only. Fakes called out. Both sides on the table. No jumping ahead of the evidence. And on this case, that promise means more than it ever has. If you want the real answer the moment it's real, and not somebody's fabricated version of it, subscribe and turn on notifications so you get it here first, laid out straight. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Out of everything this week, the timeline gap, the fake report the state had to shut down, the lawyers lining up, or that attack on Christine's job, which one hit you the hardest? And where do you think this goes next? Drop it below. We read every single one, and your comments genuinely shape where we take this. This is Beyond Dark Cases, where we stay with the forgotten and the recent, the disappearances and the unanswered, long after everybody else has moved on. Until the next confirmed update, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you back here.